Chapter 9. Necros, Zuluhead, chieftain of the shaman of the Dragon Maw clan, strode down the long corridor, glaring at every orc that dared get in his way. Necros, he bellowed again. Necros, he bellowed again. Here, I'm here. Necros Skullcrusher limped out of a nearby cavern, his wooden leg clanking against the rough stone floor, ducking to keep from bashing his head against the low doorway. What? Zulu had stopped beside his second and glared at him. How goes the weapon? Zulu had demanded, leaning close. Is it ready? Necros grinned at him, showing his yellow tusks. Come and see for yourself. He turned and limped back the way he had come, and Zulu had followed, muttering to himself. He hated this place. It was called Grim Batol, or at least the dwarves had named it so. But it had been one of their fortresses then. Now it belonged to the Dragon Maw, and though its chambers were large enough, he despised the low-ceilinged corridors and even lower doorways, tall enough for dwarves but barely enough for most orcs. They would have enlarged the openings, but stone was difficult to work, and they had little time for such frivolities. The fortress was sturdy, carved into the mountain itself, and easily defended, and that was the important thing. Necros led him down farther into the fortress, and finally into a vast underground chamber, and there, chained to the wall by heavy links of dark iron, was a sight that still made Zuluhead catch his breath. Filling the room end to end was a vast figure, coiled in about itself either for comfort or from despair. Yet still its wingtips brushed the ceiling and its tail lashed at the far wall. Torches guttered along the walls, their light reflecting from scale after scale, gleaming red as blood, red as flame. A dragon. Not just any dragon either. This was aLilFoxz, the greatest of the red dragons, mother of her flight, the queen of her people, perhaps the most powerful creature in this world, strong enough to destroy entire clans with a single sweep of her majestic claws and consume whole ogres with a snap of her mighty jaws. Yet they had captured her. Well, Necros had. The entire clan had sought a dragon for weeks, any dragon, and had at last spied a lone red male flying low above the forest, nursing a wounded wing. Zuluhead had not wanted to think what could have injured such a majestic creature, but it had made their task easier. They had followed the dragon back to its family's lair, a high mountain peak around which dragons flew like birds dancing upon the air. They had watched that peak for days, unsure what to do next, until Necros announced that he had tamed the demon soul. Then they had slowly, cautiously crept up to the top, and there they discovered aLilFoxz and her 3 mates. The Dragon Queen had noticed them immediately, and had killed 4 orcs in an instant, opening her mouth and dousing them with flames. But then Necros had stepped forward and subdued her, by himself. He had ordered aLilFoxz and her kin to follow him here, and they had. The rest of the Dragon Maw had sung Necros' praises that day, the orc who single-handedly cowed an entire dragonflight. But the maimed warrior warlock would not have been able to do so without Zuluhead, or the artifact he had found. Zuluhead wished he were able to wield the item himself, but the demon soul had not responded to him or his shamanic magic. It had only answered to Necros, and now the peg-legged orc was the only one capable of controlling it. But that was acceptable, because that meant it was Necros who was trapped here in these caves, and Zuluhead who could fight with the rest of the horde. Not that the peg-legged orc was much fit for anything else. He had become useless in combat the minute a human had severed his left leg below the knee. Most orcs would have killed themselves then, or at least leaped upon another foe and died in battle. Necros had survived, though whether from cowardice or ill luck no one could say. Zuluhead was glad Necros had, because though he had found the demon soul, Zuluhead had been unable to use it. He had been able to sense the power trapped within the disc, even before he had uncovered it in a small cave deep below the mountains, but that power had remained locked within the gleaming gold artifact. Clearly something other than shaman lore was needed here. Zuluhead had considered bringing the object, which he named the Demon Soul because he could sense the demon-tainted energy within it, along with some other massive power he could not identify, to Doomhammer, but had decided against it. The war chief was a powerful warrior and a noble orc, but he had no experience with or understanding of magic. Gul'dan had been another possibility, but Zuluhead did not trust the wily chief warlock. He remembered when Gul'dan had been young and apprenticed to Ner'zhul. Now there had been a shaman, wise and noble, revered by all. Ner'zhul had worked for the betterment of not only his own clan, but all the orcs. It had been he who had first brought them strange gifts of knowledge and power from ancient spirits, and he who had encouraged and cemented stronger bonds between different clans. For a time, all had been good. Then it had all gone wrong. The spirits had proven false, and their own ancestor spirits stopped speaking to them out of anger. The shaman had lost their powers, leaving their clans defenseless from magical attack. He offered to teach the other shaman, and many had accepted his offer, becoming warlocks. Not Zuluhead, however. He had not trusted Gul'dan, who had always struck him as self-serving, and these strange powers smacked of the demonic. It was horror enough that the ancestors no longer spoke to him, and that the elements no longer answered his call. He would not sully himself further by consorting with such unnatural powers as Gul'dan offered. Zuluhead had not been the only shaman to refuse, of course, but most had accepted, and then they had changed, growing larger and darker, as if their bodies reflected the taint within. Their world had suffered depredations as well, the land dying bit by bit and the skies turning red. The horde was forced to come to the strange world instead, and they had to conquer it if they wanted their clans to ever know peace again. Nekros had showed promise as an apprentice shaman, and Zuluhead had held hopes for him. But when Gul'dan had offered other magics, Nekros had jumped at them. The young orc had learned the warlock's skills as well, but something had made him step away, leaving all that behind to become a warrior once more. It had renewed Zuluhead's faith in the younger orc. He had never asked what caused the change, but he knew it had something to do with loyalties. Gul'dan and his Shadow Council, or the Dragon Maw clan. Nekros had chosen his clan. After that, Zuluhead had begun to confide in him again, and to ask the warrior for advice whenever forced to deal with the warlocks. It had been to Nekros that he had brought the disc, and though maimed, the warrior warlock had not failed him. It was thanks to Nekros that they stood here today, ready to see their plans in motion. So, Zuluhead said, starting to walk closer to the great beast, have we? He stopped as Nekros extended a thick arm, blocking his path. Wait, the grizzled orc warned. He pulled the demon soul from a pouch at his belt, holding the large, featureless gold disc aloft. Come, he called. As Zuluhead watched, a rush of tiny sparks appeared from throughout the chamber and flew together, coalescing into a shape. The shape gained dimension, depth, and detail, forming a tall, powerfully built humanoid wearing strange bone-like armor. Its head was shaped like a skull, but rimmed in flame, and its eyes were black balls of fire. The creature towered over them, as tall as an orc, but less oafish, radiating power and vigilance. We will enter, Nekros told it, holding the demon soul before him. The strange creature burst into a shower of sparks again, scattering through the room, and the maimed orc nodded for his chieftain to continue. Zulu had advanced again, cautiously at first, in case the creature had not in fact left. But it had, whatever it was. Nekros' hold over it seemed absolute, which was good since they had both seen what could happen otherwise. One of their clan members had rushed into the chamber at one point, bearing a message from Doomhammer, and not waited for Nekros to dismiss the warden. The creature had appeared from nowhere, and its large, fiery, skeletal hands had grasped the unwary orc's head on either side. Flames had sprung up then, consuming the hapless messenger. Within seconds, his screeching stopped, his body going limp as his head collapsed in on itself, a mere pile of cinders. Now, however, the chieftain was able to walk into the cavern unmolested, and he approached the Dragon Queen, stopping just beyond the reach of her chains. Her massive triangular head swiveled to watch him, those great yellow orbs staring unblinking as he studied her in turn. "Have you come to gloat then, little orc? Have you not tormented me and harmed my children enough?" aLilFoxz demanded. Her jaws snapped in fury, but the chains held her fast, their natural strength enhanced by the power of the artifact. Not to gloat, Zulu had told her, still awed by her sheer size and power. Just to make sure all is arranged. "You understand what will happen to you if you refuse us?" "This has been made abundantly clear," she replied, her words sharp with anger and grief, and she turned to look pointedly toward the cavern's far corner. A handful of pale objects lay clustered there, and though he could not see them well from here, Zulu had knew they were paper thin and mottled gold. They were the remains of an enormous egg, the size of a large orc's head, a dragon egg. When they had first captured aLilFoxz, she had refused to cooperate. Necros had solved the problem by seizing one of her unhatched eggs, holding it before the captive queen's face and smashing it with his fist, spattering himself and her with the yolk. Her shrieks had all but deafened them, and her thrashing had knocked several orcs to the ground, breaking limbs on 2 of them. But the chains had held, and after that she had cooperated, albeit reluctantly. Anything to avoid seeing more of her children destroyed, unborn. "You will not succeed," aLilFoxz informed him. "You have chained me, but my children will defy you and win their freedom." "Not while we have this," Necros replied, showing her the disc. He frowned, clearly concentrating, and the Dragon Queen's body arced in pain, a thin hiss escaping her clenched jaws. "I will kill you someday," she warned, still writhing in agony, her eyes narrowed in both pain and hatred. Necros laughed. "Perhaps," he agreed, "but until then, you and yours will serve the Horde." Zulu had gestured, and Necros nodded, following him from the cavern. The queen snapped at air behind them, her act of defiance meaningless after their own show of power. Zulu had led the way down another corridor and into a second, even larger chamber. This one opened along the side of the mountain, and beyond its fiery shapes flew flashes of color against the darkening sky. "Release her," one of them demanded, swooping close, claws outstretched, jaws open. "Release our mother." "Never," Necros held up the demon soul, and the approaching dragon screamed in pain, twisting to stay aloft as his body trembled and spasmed. The other dragons backed off slightly, though they continued to wheel about overhead. "Your mother is our captive, as are her mates," Zulu had shouted, knowing the dragons could hear him despite their altitude. "They will remain so. You and all their children will serve us, serve the Horde, or she will die, screaming from the same pain you just felt. And with her your flight will die, for without aLilFoxz there will be no more red dragon hatchlings. You will be the last of your kind." The dragons cried out in anger, but Zulu had knew they would obey. He had seen the bond between mother and child, and it was strong enough to force them to obedience. As long as aLilFoxz thought there was hope for her children, she would serve them by producing litter upon litter of dragon eggs. And as long as she and 3 of her mates were their captives, her children would serve them as well, in the hopes of one day freeing their mother. Zulu had grinned, watching the young draglings soaring above him. Even now his orcs were hard at work, fashioning leather straps and reins and seats. Soon they would bring the first red dragon down into this cave and fit him with a harness and a saddle. He would hate that, of course. The dragons were fiercely independent, and no one had ever dared ride them before, but his clan would. This was what he had promised Doomhammer, and the war chief had been enthused about the project. This would be their secret weapon. The humans had troops and cavalry and ships, but they could not take to the air. With the dragons under his control and loyal orcs astride them, the Zuluhead could strike at the humans from above and then swoop back out of their reach. The dragons were powerful foes physically, with their claws and their jaws and their tails, but it was their fiery breath that would truly devastate the humans. Fire would rain down upon them, destroying them and their equipment, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. With the dragons on their side, the Horde would be invincible, and he, Zulu head of the Dragon Maw clan, was responsible. Without those visions, he would have never found the demon soul, or sensed that it was somehow linked with the dragons, and without its powers and Necros to unlock them, he could not have enslaved aLilFoxz. But they had, and soon the first dragon riders would take to the air, joining the rest of the Horde and awaiting Doomhammer's commands. Zuluhead grinned. All was going according to plan.